That cold morning, no one expected an act of compassion to change everything. What started as another quiet day near the reserve became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, every roar and every breath matters, because behind every white tiger there is a story worth saving. The frost clung to the chain-link fence like a fragile promise, the kind that breaks under the weight of winter's indifference. It was dawn at the edge of Willow Creek Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a sprawling patchwork of enclosures and outbuildings tucked against the pine-dotted hills of rural Montana. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The only sounds, the faint creak of settling snow and the muffled hum of a generator kicking on in the distance. Inside the main clinic, fluorescent lights buzzed to life, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the center's lead veterinarian, rubbed her eyes as she pulled on her lab coat. She'd been up half the night with an injured owl, its wing fractured from a run-in with a power line. At 42, Elena had seen her share of desperate cases, poachers' traps, orphaned fawns, the slow fade of animals too wild for captivity. But this one felt different from the moment the call came in. A white tiger cub, barely 6 weeks old, blind and abandoned, found staggering along the highway by a trucker who'd pulled over, thinking it was some escaped lab experiment. White tigers weren't native here, they were rarities, smuggled or bred in secret, their pale coats a curse in the wild. This one had been dumped, left to the mercy of the cold. Elena stepped into the isolation room, her boots echoing softly. The cub lay curled in a corner of the stainless steel crate, its fur matted and dull. The striking white stripes faded against the grime. Its eyes were clouded, milky voids that stared at nothing, a congenital blindness that made every shadow a threat. The little creature's breaths came in shallow rasps, each one a quiet battle against the chill that had seeped into its bones. No roar, no fierce swat, just a trembling form. Paws tucked under its chest, as if to hoard what warmth it had left. The air smelled faintly of wet fur and the metallic tang of fear sweat, though the cub made no sound beyond that labored breathing. She knelt beside the crate, gloved hands hovering. "Easy now," she whispered, more to herself than the animal. The cub didn't flinch, didn't even lift its head. Elena's fingers brushed the bars, feeling the faint vibration of its heartbeat through the metal. It was dehydrated, malnourished, its tiny body fighting an infection that had already taken hold in its lungs. X-rays from the night before showed fluid building, a pneumonia that could turn fatal without intervention. And then there was the bigger problem. The center was at capacity, funding thin as the winter ice on the creek. Euthanasia loomed like a shadow in these cases, not cruelty but necessity when suffering outpaced hope. Outside, the gravel crunched under tires. Tom Hargrove, the center's grizzled ranger, pulled up in his battered Ford pickup, steam rising from the hood like a sigh. At 58, Tom had patrolled these woods for 3 decades, his face etched with lines from too many sunrises, chasing poachers or nursing strays back to health. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the frost-laced pines. Whispers had already spread through town, folks at the diner calling the cub a freak of nature, unworthy of the resources. "Let it go," one old-timer had grumbled over coffee. "Wildlife's got its own rules. We interfere. We pay." Tom had nodded, but inside doubt gnawed. He'd lost a wife to cancer years back, watched her fade in a hospital bed much like this one. Mercy had its limits, but so did turning away. He climbed out, boots sinking into the snow, and headed toward the clinic. Inside, he found Elena charting notes at her desk, the cub's file open before her. "How's the little ghost holding up?" he asked, his voice gravelly from the cold. Elena glanced up, her dark eyes tired. "Not good. Vitals are dropping. Antibiotics aren't kicking in fast enough." She paused, tapping her pen against the paper. Board's pushing for a decision by noon. We can't keep her if there's no chance. Tom leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. The room fell quiet, save for the cub's ragged breaths filtering through the vents. He thought of the trucker who'd brought her in, a burly man named Jack Riley, hands shaking as he described finding the cub huddled by the roadside, mewling faintly into the wind. Jack had a farm just outside town, raised cattle and kept a pack of working dogs. "Looked like it was praying for help," he'd said, voice cracking. "Couldn't just drive by." But even Jack had his doubts now, calling Tom that morning to ask if it was kinder to end it quick. In the next room, through the half-open door, Sarah Mills, the center's young assistant vet tech, was prepping supplies. At 28, Sarah was all optimism and quiet resolve, her blonde hair tied back under a knit cap she'd forgotten to remove. She'd grown up in Willow Creek, volunteering since high school, driven by a childhood memory of nursing an injured fox back to life. But this cub tested her. "It's so small," she murmured to no one, folding a clean towel. "Like it's already given up." She glanced toward the isolation room, where the silence stretched, broken only by the cub's faint wheeze. People in town were already judging, calling the center a zoo for mistakes, saying white tigers belonged in circuses, not rehab. Fear masked as practicality. What if it grew aggressive? What if it couldn't survive blind? Elena stood, smoothing her coat. She approached the crate again, unlocking it with a soft click. The cub stirred slightly, its nose twitching at the unfamiliar scent of her gloves. No lunge, no hiss, just a weak nudge against the air, as if sensing kindness through the void of its sight. Elena's hand trembled as she reached in, stroking the soft fur along its flank. The touch was electric, a reminder of the fragility beneath the myth. White tigers were symbols of rarity, of untamed beauty misunderstood. This one, blind and broken, pleaded without words, its eyes fixed on some invisible horizon. "If we don't help her," Elena said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the lights, "no one will." The words hung in the air, a quiet challenge to the doubts circling like crows outside. Tom nodded slowly, Sarah pausing in the doorway, her breath catching. The morning stretched on, cold and unforgiving. As the first decision loomed, a moral suspense that would test them all. The cub's breaths grew shallower, the world narrowing to the space between fear and compassion. In the distance, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faint echo of what might yet be saved. The decision hung in the clinic like the frost on the windows, thick and unyielding. Eleanor withdrew her hand from the crate, the cub's fur lingering on her fingertips, soft as forgotten snow. She straightened, her lab coat whispering against the tile, and turned to Tom and Sarah. The room felt smaller now, the air charged with the weight of what came next. Outside, the sun clawed its way higher, painting the pines in pale gold, but inside, shadows clung to the corners, mirroring the doubt in their eyes. Tom shifted his weight, boots scraping faintly. "Called the board chairman on the way in," he said, his voice low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the cub's fragile rhythm. "Frank's got no patience for long shots. Says we've got real locals. Deer hit by cars, foxes with mange, taking up space. This one's exotic, sure, but blind. It's a liability." He glanced at the crate, where the cub lay still, its sides rising and falling in uneven waves. No plea in those milky eyes, just an emptiness that pulled at something deep in him, like the ache of empty hospital rooms from years ago. Sarah stepped forward, her hands twisting the edge of the towel she'd been holding. "But she's just a baby," she protested softly, her voice threading through the quiet like a hesitant melody. We can't just decide like that." She'd seen the town's judgment firsthand, overheard it at the gas station that morning, where locals clustered around the coffee urn, muttering about wasting taxpayer dollars on some circus reject. To them, the white tiger cub was a spectacle, not a life, too rare to be real, too vulnerable to be worth the risk. Fear dressed as reason. What if it lashed out as it grew? What if releasing it meant dooming it to a predator's jaws? Sarah's optimism cracked under the weight, her breath hitching as she imagined the needle, the final stillness. Elena nodded, but her face remained composed, a mask honed from too many endings. She pulled up a stool, the legs scraping like a reluctant confession, and sat before the crate. The cub's breaths rattled now, a wet undercurrent signaling the pneumonia's advance. She checked the IV line they'd started overnight, the drip steady but futile against the infection's tide. Vitals at 92/60, she murmured, jotting it down. Temperatures down to 98. If we push the euthanasia, it's quick, no suffering. The words tasted bitter clinical armor against the truth. This cub, with its pristine white coat marred by neglect, embodied the wild's quiet desperation. Smuggled from some backwoods breeder, perhaps, abandoned when its blindness marked it as flawed. Elena's own past flickered, a childhood in the Southwest, watching her father's ranch hands put down lame horses without a second thought. Mercy, they'd called it, but she'd always wondered if it was just fear of the fight. The door to the clinic banged open, letting in a gust of chill air that stirred the papers on Eleanor's desk. Jack Riley stomped in, snow dusting his flannel shirt, his face flushed from the cold drive. The trucker who'd found the cub carried the road's weariness in his broad shoulders, calluses from years gripping the wheel. Behind him, on a makeshift leash of rope tied to his belt, trotted Max, his loyal border collie, black and white fur, sleek, eyes sharp and alert. Max had been Jack's companion for a decade, herding cattle on the farm, sensing storms before they broke. Today the dog padded in without hesitation, nose twitching at the unfamiliar scents. "Figured I'd check on the little one," Jack said, unwinding the rope with rough hands. His voice boomed a touch too loud, echoing off the sterile walls. "Town's buzzing. Folks say you're fixing to put it down. Reckon that's smart?" He eyed the crate warily, keeping distance, as if the cub's blindness might still hide fangs. Max, though, strained forward, ears perked, a low whine escaping her throat. The dog had been in the truck that fateful morning, barking furiously when Jack pulled over, as if she'd known the cub was there before he did. Tom straightened, nodding to Jack. "Board's leaning that way. Resources are tight." He didn't mention his own pull towards saving her, the way the cub's silence echoed his wife's last days, fading without protest, dignity in the quiet. Sarah knelt to pet Max, seeking distraction in the dog's warm fur. "She's a fighter," she said, glancing at the crate. "Look at her. She's not giving up." Eleanor rose, addressing Jack directly. "You brought her in. What do you think?" Her question was a bridge, testing the water between stranger and stakeholder. Jack rubbed his neck, gaze flicking to the cub. "Dunno. Found her curled up like a snowball by the mile marker, mewling into the wind. Max wouldn't shut up till I stopped. Thought it was a ghost at first. That white fur against the snow." He paused, the memory softening his edges. "But blind? World's hard enough without eyes. Kinder to end it, maybe." Yet his words faltered, undercut by the doubt in his stance. The town saw him as pragmatic, a man who fixed fences and drove through blizzards without complaint. But Jack had buried a son young, lost to a farm accident, a boy who'd loved animals, nursed strays in the barn. Turning away now felt like betraying that memory. In the hush that followed, Max pulled free from Sarah's hand and approached the crate unbidden. The border collie circled it once, nose low, then sat squarely in front, her head tilting as if listening to the cub's labored breaths. The room stilled, even the fluorescent hum seemed to fade. The cub stirred, its head lifting fractionally, nostrils flaring at the new scent, earthy, alive, laced with the reassurance of pack. "A faint rumble, not a growl but a vibration deep in its chest," answered Max's presence. The dog's tail thumped once, slowly. Her eyes fixed on the bars, unblinking. Elena froze, breath caught. "What is she doing?" she whispered, more awe than question. No one moved, the moment stretching like taffy, human judgment suspended by instinct's quiet intervention. Max leaned closer, pressing her nose to the gap, exhaling warm air that fogged the metal. The cub inched forward, blind eyes unseeing but body responding, a paw extending tentatively. Contact fur to fur through the bars, a bridge of warmth in the cold clinic. Tom's hand rested on the doorframe, knuckles white. "Never seen that," he muttered. Sarah's eyes welled, tears held back by sheer will. Jack watched, transfixed, the road-hardened man seeing something redeemable in the scene, a loyalty that crossed species, raw and unasked for. The cub's breaths evened slightly, the rattle easing under Max's vigil. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but a spark. Compassion flickering where fear had dimmed. Eleanor knelt beside them, her trembling hand joining the touch, the moral suspense twisting toward hope. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering frost from the eaves as if the world itself paused to witness. The decision, once inevitable, now wavered, pulled by the silent bond unfolding before them. In that fragile connection, the cub's story deepened, revealing the misunderstood heart beneath the white fur, a plea for survival that demanded they confront their own. The clinic's air thickened with the scent of pine from Max's fur, mingling with the sterile tang of antiseptic and the faint, earthy musk of the cub's labored existence. Elena remained kneeling, her gloved hand suspended near the crate, as if bridging the impossible gap between worlds. The border collie's nose pressed firmly against the bars, warm breath clouding the metal in rhythmic puffs that synced, almost imperceptibly, with the cub's weakening exhales. No one spoke. The moment demanded silence, a hush broken only by the soft thump of Max's tail against the tile, steady as a heartbeat, refusing to fade. Jack shifted his weight, boots scraping like a reluctant admission, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the floor. He'd come expecting finality, a nod to practicality, a quick end to the cub's suffering. But this scene unraveled him. The dog's unwavering gaze, fixed on the milky voids of the cub's eyes, stirred memories of his son's small hands cradling injured birds, whispering encouragements into the night. "Reckon that's something," he murmured finally, voice rough as gravel under tires. He didn't move closer, but his stance softened, the rope leash dangling forgotten in his fist. Sarah, still crouched beside Max, reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing the dog's flank. Tears brimmed in her eyes, unchecked now, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. The cub's paw, delicate and trembling, extended further through the bars, pads rough from the roadside cold, curling against Max's muzzle. It wasn't affection in the human sense, just instinct, raw and unfiltered, a blind seeking of warmth in the void. The white fur, so pristine despite the grime, caught the fluorescent light like fresh snow under moonlight, a symbol of purity adrift in a world quick to discard. Tom lingered by the door, arms crossed tight across his chest, as if holding back the tide of his own doubts. The ranger's face, weathered by decades of patrols through unforgiving forests, creased deeper. He'd seen bonds like this before, deer nursing orphaned fawns, wolves circling the weak to protect, not destroy, but never across such chasms. The cub's rumble deepened, a vibration that hummed through the crate, easing the wheeze in its chest. Max responded with a soft chuff, her body language a quiet vow, stay, endure. Outside, the wind howled faintly against the windows, rattling the panes like distant applause for this fragile alliance. Elena withdrew her hand slowly, rising to her feet with a quiet exhale. The moral suspense that had gripped the room twisted now, pulling toward an uncharted path. "We need to stabilize her," she said, her voice steady but laced with the tremor of revelation. "Antibiotics, fluids, and keep Max close if it helps." It was a decision born not from protocol, but from the scene before them. The dog's loyalty piercing the veil of fear, forcing them to see the cub not as a liability, but as a life worth the risk. She moved to the supply cabinet, pulling vials and syringes with practiced efficiency, her hands no longer trembling, but purposeful. The group converged, subtly, a circle of quiet resolve around the crate. Sarah fetched a heating pad, wrapping it gently around the base without disturbing the contact. Tom stepped forward at last, his calloused fingers unlatching the crate door with a soft click that echoed like permission granted. Max didn't flinch as the space opened. Instead, she inched closer, her nose now nuzzling the cub's extended paw. The little tiger stirred, its body uncoiling fractionally, flanks rising with deeper breaths. No lash of claws, no defensive snarl, just a tentative lean into the warmth. Blind trust forged in the instant of touch. Jack watched, transfixed, the road's endless miles forgotten in this pocket of stillness. "Never thought I'd see a dog mothering a tiger," he said, a half-smile cracking his facade. But beneath it lay the weight of his loss, the boy who dreamed of a world where animals and humans coexisted without borders. This cub, with its misunderstood rarity, mirrored that innocence, its white coat a beacon against the shadows of abandonment. The town's judgments echoed in his mind, voices at the diner dismissing the cub as unnatural, unworthy of the center's scarce beds. Yet here, in the clinic's hush, those words felt hollow, overshadowed by the silent plea in the cub's unseeing gaze. As Elena administered the next dose, the IV line snaking carefully past Max's vigilant form, the tension rose like mist off the creek at dawn. The cub's temperature flickered upward, a fragile victory, but the infection lingered, a shadow threatening to reclaim ground. Sarah monitored the vitals, her breath hitching at each beep of the machine, 92/62 now, pulse steadying under the dog's influence. Tom radioed the board, his voice clipped over the static, delaying the call, showing progress. The response crackled back terse, laced with skepticism, but for the first time, doubt crept into their ranks. Hours blurred in the clinic's timeless glow, the sun arcing toward noon without warmth, penetrating the frost-laced glass. Max refused to budge, curling her body against the crate's edge, a living barrier against the cold. The cub, emboldened, nosed closer, its tiny tongue flicking out to taste the air, scented with canine reassurance. In that bond, redemption stirred, not loud proclamations, but quiet awakenings. Elena paused in her charting, watching the pair, her own past resurfacing. The horses put down too soon, the mercy that felt like surrender. Saving this cub meant reclaiming something lost, a confrontation with her limits. The door creaked open again, admitting a gust that carried the crisp bite of pine and distant highway hum. But inside, the world narrowed to breaths intertwining, dog and tiger, human hands hovering in support. The cub's eyes, though blind, seemed to hold a spark now, reflecting the light of compassion, dared. Outside, Willow Creek stirred with its routines, oblivious to the moral thriller unfolding, where fear yielded to instinct's gentle pull. The white tiger cub, once slated for silence, breathed on, its story weaving deeper into the fabric of those who chose to see. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and compassion can travel. The afternoon light slanted through the clinic's narrow windows, casting elongated shadows that danced across the tile like hesitant spectres. The frost on the panes had begun to melt in uneven rivulets, tracing paths down the glass as if the building itself wept for the fragile life within. Inside the isolation room, the air hummed with the soft beep of monitors and the deeper rhythm of intertwined breaths, Max's steady inhales mingling with the cub's now faint but persistent rasps. The border collie had not moved from her post, her body a warm curve against the open crate, one paw resting lightly on the edge, as if anchoring the little tiger to the world. Elena adjusted the IV drip, her movements deliberate, each twist of the valve a quiet defiance against the clock. The antibiotics coursed through the line, battling the pneumonia's insidious grip, but the cub's temperature hovered stubbornly at 99 degrees, a fever that ebbed and flowed like the creek outside after a storm. She watched as the cub's flank rose and fell, the white fur catching glints of light, revealing the delicate stripes beneath the grime, marks of a lineage meant for majesty, now reduced to survival's raw edge. The animal's blind eyes remained half-lidded, unseeing but alert to the scents and sounds that defined its reality. The dog's earthy warmth, the faint rubber of gloves, the underlying tang of medicine that promised both salvation and surrender. Tom paced the hallway just beyond the door, his radio clipped to his belt, crackling intermittently with updates from the reserve's perimeter. The board's skepticism lingered in his mind, their voices over the line sharp as winter wind. Progress or not, Hargrove? We're not running a sideshow. He stopped, leaning against the wall, the cool plaster grounding him. Decades of rangers' tales echoed in his thoughts. Stories of wolves left to the wild's mercy, eagles grounded by lead shot. Choices made in the grey space between intervention and letting nature claim its due. This cub, with its pale coat a whisper against the ordinary browns and greys of local wildlife, forced a deeper reckoning. It wasn't just about resources, it was about the line he drew in the snow, the one separating duty from the ache of what might have been for his wife, her breaths fading in a bed, much like this one, machines beeping their futile vigil. Sarah slipped back into the room, carrying a basin of warmed water and soft cloths, her steps muffled on the tile. She knelt beside Elena, dipping a cloth and gently wiping the cub's muzzle, careful not to disrupt the bond with Max. The dog's ears flicked at the motion, but she held her ground, her gaze never leaving the cub's form. Sarah's hands trembled slightly, the water steaming faintly in the cool air, carrying the subtle scent of chamomile from the herbal rinse she'd added, a small ritual, more comfort than cure. "She's responding," Sarah whispered, her voice barely threading the silence. The cub's nose twitched, seeking the warmth of the cloth, a faint nudge against it that spoke of instinct's quiet persistence. In that touch, Sarah saw her younger self, bandaging the fox in her family's shed, whispering promises to the night. The town's murmurs reached her even here, overheard at the feed store, where farmers shook their heads, calling the effort fool's gold for a creature that couldn't hunt, couldn't see the dangers ahead. Fear wrapped in folklore, white tigers as omens, blind ones as curses. But up close, the cub was no myth, just a small body fighting, its paws kneading weakly against Max's fur. Jack had lingered outside initially, pacing the gravel lot with his truck idling, exhaust curling like smoke signals into the cold. But the pull of the scene drew him back, his boots crunching snow as he re-entered, hat in hand. He stood in the doorway now, a hulking silhouette, watching the tableau with eyes softened by the weight of roads traveled alone. Max's presence had cracked something in him. The dog, who'd herded his cattle through blizzards and sensed his grief after the accident, now extended that loyalty to this outsider. The cub leaned into the contact, its body uncoiling further, a low vibration rumbling from its throat, not distress, but a tentative contentment, as if the canine's scent evoked the safety of a den long lost. Jack's son had been like that with strays, drawing them close with a voice that bridged worlds. "If a dog's got faith in her," he said quietly, stepping closer, "who are we to say otherwise?" His words hung, a bridge over the chasm of doubt, revealing the redemption stirring in his chest, the chance to honor a boy's dream through action, not just memory. The tension crested as the monitor's beep quickened, the cub's pulse spiking to 140, a feverish surge that sent Elena's hand to the stethoscope. She pressed it gently to the cub's chest, the cold metal eliciting a faint shiver, but Max's low chuff steadied it. The dog, shifting to nuzzle the tiger's ear, fluid in the lungs gurgled audibly now, the pneumonia demanding more than drips and warmth, a nebulizer perhaps, or a riskier procedure to drain the build-up. Elena's breath hitched, the room's silence amplifying the struggle. She could feel the cub's heartbeat through the scope, erratic yet fierce, a wild rhythm underscoring the vulnerability of its white form. No roar echoed here, just the soft plea of labored air, eyes clouded but holding a spark of recognition for the comforts offered. Sarah fetched the nebulizer from the supply room, her footsteps echoing like distant thunder, returning to set it up with trembling efficiency. Mist filled the crate, carrying medication that coated the cub's airways, easing the rattle incrementally. Tom joined them at last, his presence a solid anchor, radio silenced for the moment. He knelt opposite Elena, his rough hand steadying the device, the group forming an unspoken circle around the pair, dog and tiger, intertwined in the mist's haze. The cub's breaths deepened, the spike easing to 120, a fragile plateau. Outside, the wind whispered against the eaves, carrying the faint hum of the highway, a reminder of the world beyond that judged without seeing. In that suspended hush, a deeper truth surfaced for Eleanor. The cub's blindness mirrored her own buried fears. The time she'd chosen protocol over heart, euthanizing the untamable to spare prolonged pain. But Max's instinct, pure and unyielding, reframed it. The white tiger not as a doomed rarity, but a call to the compassion they'd nearly forsaken. Jack's eyes met hers across the crate, a nod passing between them, silent acknowledgement of the moral turn. The cub settled against Max, paws tucked, its body warming under the heating pad's glow. No dramatic recovery yet, just the slow burn of hope, flickering brighter, pulling them deeper into the thriller of choice. The clinic held its breath with them, the afternoon fading into twilight's embrace, as survival's weight settled, demanding they press on. Twilight deepened outside the clinic, the pines standing sentinel as shadows stretched long across the snow-dusted grounds. Inside, the isolation room glowed under the steady hum of lamps, their warm light pooling around the crate like a fragile halo. The nebulizer's mist had settled into a fine haze, clinging to the air and softening the edges of the scene. Max's black and white form curled protectively, the cub's white fur damp and glistening, breaths sinking in a tentative harmony. Eleanor sat back on her heels, stethoscope dangling from her neck, her dark eyes tracing the subtle rise and fall of the pair. The monitor's beep had steadied to a rhythmic pulse, 110 now, but the fever lingered, a stubborn heat that flushed the cub's ears pink beneath the pale coat. She rose quietly, joints protesting the hours on the cold floor, and moved to the sink, washing her hands with deliberate slowness. Water ran cool over her skin, a momentary cleanse from the weight pressing in. Tom followed her gaze back to the crate, his silhouette filling the doorway, the ranger's quiet strength a counterpoint to the room's vulnerability. He'd silenced his radio hours ago, the board's demands fading into irrelevance against this unfolding bond. Sarah lingered nearby, folding used cloths with mechanical care, her blonde hair escaping its tie in wispy strands that caught the light. Jack had pulled up a stool in the corner, his trucker frame hunched forward, elbows on knees, watching as if the scene etched itself into his road-weary soul. No words passed between them at first. The silence was a canvas for the cub's faint vibrations, a low purr that rumbled through the bars, drawing Max's ear to twitch in response. The dog's eyes, sharp and knowing, never wavered, her body heat seeping into the crate like a promise against the encroaching night. The cub shifted, its blind head nuzzling closer to the contact, paws kneading softly against Max's flank, a gesture of pure instinct seeking the pack's embrace in a world of shadows. Its milky eyes, fixed on nothing, held a quiet plea, the white stripes along its sides rising with each inhale, a pattern of survival etched in fur. Elena's thoughts drifted to the X-rays pinned to the light box across the room, the fluid's dark bloom in the cub's lungs, a stark reminder of the battle's fragility. The antibiotics fought on, but the infection clawed back, demanding more, perhaps a chest tap. A procedure risky for such a small form, where one slip could unravel everything. She dried her hands, the towel rough against her palms, and approached the group again, her steps measured. "We need to monitor through the night," she said softly, voice threading the hush like smoke. "If the fever breaks, we might turn it, but if it spikes—" The unspoken hung heavy, a moral precipice where compassion teetered against the cub's suffering. Tom nodded, his calloused hand resting on the crate's edge, inches from Max's tail. The touch grounded him, echoing the nights he'd sat vigil by his wife's bedside, willing strength into fading breaths. This cub, with its misunderstood rarity, smuggled from some distant captivity, abandoned for its flaws, mirrored that helplessness, forcing him to confront the failures he'd buried under layers of Ranger's resolve. The town's judgments whispered at the edges of his mind, calls to the center's line, voices demanding the freak be dealt with swiftly, resources saved for the familiar wild, fear masked as wisdom. What if the cub grew feral, its blindness twisting into aggression? But here, in the quiet interplay of dog and tiger, those fears dissolved, revealing the innocence beneath, a life pleading through touch, not threat. Sarah knelt once more, her hand hovering near the cub's flank, feeling the warmth radiate through the bars. Tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving faint tracks, but her expression held a fierce tenderness now, born from the small victories, the evened breaths, the nudge of trust. She'd volunteered here to escape the town's small cruelties, the way locals dismissed strays as nuisances, quick to poison or trap. This white tiger cub, with its ethereal coat a stark contrast to the muddy earth outside, challenged that indifference, its vulnerability a mirror to her own hidden scars. Evtha lost to the bottle, leaving her to mend the broken things alone. Max's loyalty amplified it, the dog's unyielding presence a lesson in bonds forged beyond reason, pulling Sarah deeper into the redemption of action. Jack stirred, the stool creaking under his shift, his eyes reflecting the lamp's glow as he watched the cub's paw curl around Max's. The border collie's whine was soft, encouraging, her tongue flicking out to groom the cub's ear with gentle laps. The little tiger responded with a deeper rumble, body relaxing fractionally, the fever's flush easing to a subtle warmth. Jack's breath hitched, the scene stirring the ghost of his son, the boy who'd once bandaged a litter of kittens in the barn, declaring them family against all odds. The road had hardened him since, miles blurring grief into routine, but this moment cracked the shell. Saving the cub meant reclaiming that lost tenderness, a quiet justice for the life cut short. "She's got spirit," he murmured, voice thick, the words more for himself than the room. Tension coiled anew as the monitor's beep accelerated, the cub's pulse jumping to 130, a sudden surge that shattered the calm. Elena lunged forward, stethoscope in hand, pressing it to the heaving chest. The lungs gurgled wetly, fluid shifting dangerously, the pneumonia's crisis cresting like a storm over the hills. Max whined sharply, nosing the cub insistently, her body language urgent, a mother's alarm in canine form. The cub writhed weakly, paws scrabbling against the crate floor, blind eyes squeezing shut in distress, its white form arching in silent agony. No roar escaped, just a choked gasp, the air thick with the scent of exertion and mist. Sarah's hands flew to the oxygen mask, fitting it carefully over the cub's muzzle, her fingers trembling but sure. Tom steadied the line, his grip iron as Elena prepared the syringe for a diuretic, a desperate bid to clear the build-up. The room narrowed to this frenzy of care, breaths held, shadows flickering from the hurried movements. Jack rose, hovering uselessly, his face paling as the cub's struggles mirrored the farm accident's chaos, the helplessness of watching life slip. But in the midst, Max pressed closer, her warmth a constant, licking the cub's paw with fervent strokes, instinct weaving through the panic like a lifeline. The injection took, the cub's body stilling gradually, pulse dropping to 115 as the fluid eased. Eleanor exhaled, leaning against the wall, sweat beading on her brow despite the chill. The crisis passed, but the edge lingered, a reminder of how thin the line between hope and loss truly was. The cub settled against Max, breaths ragged but reclaiming rhythm, its unseeing gaze turning toward the voices, toward the humans who'd chosen to fight. In that hush, revelations settled. Eleanor saw her younger self in the cub's resilience, the horses she'd condemned now redeemed through this act. Tom felt his wife's memory lighten, mercy redefined as persistence. Sarah's optimism hardened into resolve. The town's fears no match for the bond before her. Jack glimpsed his son's spirit in the dog's devotion, a bridge across years of solitude. Outside, stars pricked the velvet sky, the wind sighing through the pines like a held breath released. The clinic pulsed with quiet victory, the white tiger cub's story deepening, its blind trust demanding they press further into the night, where compassion's light pierced the gathering dark. The night wrapped the Willow Creek Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in a shroud of stillness, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the faint creak of settling snow under the eaves. Inside the isolation room, the lamps burned low, their amber glow casting a cocoon of light around the crate where Max lay steadfast, her black and white form a sentinel against the encroaching dark. The cub nestled closer now, its small body tucked into the curve of the dog's side, white fur blending with the shadows like a ghost seeking solace. The oxygen mask had been removed hours ago, but the cub's breaths still carried a subtle wheeze. Each inhale a quiet negotiation with the remnants of the pneumonia that had nearly claimed it. Its blind eyes, milky and unblinking, stared into the void, yet its ears flicked at the soft rhythm of Max's heartbeat, a lifeline in the sensory haze. Eleanor sat on the stool nearby, her lab coat draped over the back like a surrendered flag, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms etched with faint scars from past encounters, claws and teeth that had tested her resolve. She sipped black coffee from a chipped mug, the steam curling upward in lazy spirals, its bitterness a mirror to the vigil's toll. The monitor's green line traced steady waves now, pulse at 105, temperature holding at 100, a plateau, not a peak. But enough to stave off the board's final verdict until dawn. Her gaze lingered on the pair, the cub's paw draped possessively over Max's flank, tiny claws retracted in trust. In that intimate tangle, Elena felt the stirrings of her own buried truth. Years ago, during her residency in a bustling urban clinic, she'd euthanized a litter of kittens too deformed to thrive. Their eyes, much like this cub's, clouded promises of lives unlived. The decision had been swift, clinical, but it haunted her in quiet moments, a failure masked as mercy. This white tiger, with its ethereal rarity and unyielding fragility, forced her to revisit that choice, whispering that redemption lay not in endings, but in the fight prolonged. Tom had dimmed the hallway lights, his boots echoing softly as he returned from a patrol of the grounds, the chill clinging to his parka like unspoken worries. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint glow from the reception area, where the phone sat silent. No more calls from the town, at least for now. The ranger's face, illuminated in half-shadow, bore the lines of exhaustion, but his eyes softened at the sight of the cub's subtle shift, its nose burrowing deeper into Max's fur. He'd radioed the perimeter earlier, confirming no signs of the cub's origins, no tracks from poachers, no whispers of a rogue breeder in the hills. But the absence of answers only deepened the mystery. This little one, smuggled and discarded like flawed merchandise, echoed the wild's harsh poetry. Survival not guaranteed, but earned through unlikely alliances. Tom's mind wandered to his wife's final night, the hospital room's beeps mirroring this monitor's pulse, her hand limp in his as she slipped away. Turning from the cub would have been easier, a nod to the indifference that had claimed her, but Max's devotion pulled him back, revealing the ranger beneath the uniform, a man who believed in second chances, even when the world deemed them folly. Sarah moved like a shadow in the dimness, refilling the water bowl with warmed saline, her movements fluid despite the ache in her knees from hours on the floor. She placed it near the crate without a sound, watching as Max's tongue lapped once, then nudged the cub toward it. The little tiger lifted its head, nostrils flaring at the familiar scent, and took a tentative sip, droplets clinging to its whiskers like morning dew. Sarah's breath caught, a silent prayer forming in the space between her ribs. The town's undercurrent of judgment had seeped in earlier via a delivery driver, muttered words about wasting time on a circus cat while unloading feed, eyes averted from the isolation room's door. To them, the cub was an intruder, its white coat a mark of otherness, blindness a sentence unfit for the wild's unforgiving gaze. But Sarah saw the truth in the small acts. The way the cub's body relaxed under Max's warmth, instincts bridging the chasm of species. It mirrored her own hidden fracture, a teenage betrayal by friends who abandoned her after her father's accident, leaving her to navigate alone. Nurturing this vulnerable life mended that rift, her hands steady now as she adjusted the heating pad, the fabric whispering against fur. Jack slouched in the corner chair he'd dragged in from the waiting area, his hat tipped low over eyes heavy with the road's endless pull. The truck's keys dangled from his pocket, a reminder of the dawn departure he'd planned. But the scene held him captive. Max's low rumble vibrated through the floor, answered by the cub's faint echo, a duet of survival that stirred the dust of his grief. His son had been 8 when the tractor rolled, his small voice calling for the dogs as life ebbed. Loyal creatures that had stayed by the boy's side until the end. This bond, dog to tiger, unearthed that memory raw, reframing the cub not as a burden, but as a vessel for the loyalty he'd nearly forgotten. Jack's fingers twitched as if reaching for the rope leash he'd left coiled by the door, but he stayed put, the silence amplifying the cub's contented sigh as it settled deeper. Tension simmered beneath the calm as the clock ticked past midnight, the cub's temperature inching upward to a 101, a subtle betrayal of the infection's persistence. Elena leaned forward, stethoscope ready, her heart quickening at the faint gurgle returning to the breaths, a warning that the crisis might resurface, demanding a field surgery or transfer to a specialist hours away. Max sensed it first, her body stiffening, whine low and insistent, nosing the cub's side with urgent nudges. The little tiger stirred, paws flexing in discomfort, its blind form arching slightly against the discomfort, white stripes taut like drawn strings. No cry escaped, just a hitch in the rhythm. Eyes squeezing shut as if willing the pain away. The group converged without words, hands moving in practiced harmony. Elena checking vitals, Sarah prepping a fresh dose, Tom steadying the light, Jack rising to hold the door against a sudden draft. The cub's pulse climbed to 125, the room's hush fracturing with the monitor's urgent beeps, shadows lengthening as resolve hardened. In that press, revelations deepened. Elena whispered to the cub, "Hold on," her voice cracking the silence, owning the fight as her own. Tom gripped the crate, vowing silently against another loss. Sarah's tears fell unchecked, washing away old isolations. Jack knelt at last, his rough hand joining Max's touch, the trucker's solitude yielding to shared vigil. The white tiger cub, misunderstood beacon in the night, bound them tighter, its struggling breaths a call to the compassion that fear had nearly silenced. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to the moral thriller's crescendo, where instinct and heart converged in the quiet war for one fragile life. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of this white tiger reach more people who still believe in kindness. Dawn broke over Willow Creek like a hesitant promise. Pale light filtering through the clinic's frost-kissed windows, illuminating the isolation room in soft greys and golds. The night had stretched into an eternity of watchful hours, the air thick with the mingled scents of medicine, damp fur, and the faint, comforting earthiness of Max's coat. The border collie remained a constant, her body heat a living shield against the chill that seeped through the walls, her breaths deep and even as she lay pressed to the crate's open side. The cub, nestled against her, had quieted after the midnight surge, its white form rising and falling in shallow but steadier waves, the wheeze in its lungs reduced to a whisper. Its blind eyes, still clouded with milky haze, fluttered half open, unseeing, but attuned to the rhythms around it, the soft thump of Max's tail, the distant drip of melting snow outside. Elena stirred from her vigil on the stool, her neck stiff from the awkward angle, coffee mug cold and forgotten in her lap. She leaned forward, stethoscope in hand, pressing it gently to the cub's flank. The heartbeat echoed strong now, 100 beats per minute, the fever broken at last to a normal 101. 5. The antibiotics finally gaining ground against the pneumonia's retreat, but the fragility lingered. The infection had left scars, tiny fissures in the lungs that could reopen with any stress. Transfer to a larger facility loomed, a 2-hour drive through winding mountain roads, risky for a cub this weak, blind and dependent on the fragile bond that had sustained it. Elena's hand trembled as she withdrew the scope, the metal cool against her skin, a reminder of how close they'd come to the needle's final mercy. The board's ultimatum echoed in her mind, their morning call curt over the speaker, decide by sunrise, or they would. Compassion warred with reality, the cub's survival a moral gamble that could bankrupt the center. Tom entered quietly, his parka unzipped, carrying the scent of pine and fresh snow from his pre-dawn rounds. He set down a thermos of hot water on the side table, steam rising like a silent offering. The ranger's eyes, shadowed by fatigue, fixed on the pair in the crate, Max's vigilant form, the cub's paw draped over her side in quiet possession. He'd spent the night wrestling shadows of his own, visions of his wife's labored breaths in the hospital, the moment he'd chosen to let go, believing it kindness. This cub, with its pale stripes catching the dawn light like veins of quartz, challenged that surrender. It wasn't just an animal, it was a mirror to the instincts he'd suppressed, the wild heart that patrolled these woods, urging persistence over peace. The town's whispers had intensified overnight, texts from neighbors urging him to put the freak down, to free up space for real wildlife. Fear cloaked in community concern, blind to the cub's plea, its body curling closer to Max, as if sensing the gathering storm. Sarah slipped in behind him, her arms laden with clean linens and a portable carrier, her face pale but resolute in the morning glow. She'd barely slept, haunted by dreams of the cub's unseeing gaze, a reflection of her own isolation after her father's death, the way friends had turned away, leaving her to navigate grief alone. Max's unwavering loyalty had pierced that solitude, the dog's instinct a beacon showing bonds could form across divides. She knelt by the crate, her hand hovering near the cub's ear, feeling the faint warmth radiate. The little tiger stirred, nose twitching at her scent, a soft nudge against her fingers that spoke volumes in the silence. No words needed. The touch was enough, a thread weaving her into the circle of care. Jack had stayed through the night, dozing fitfully in the corner chair, his truck parked like a faithful steed outside. The trucker's broad frame rose now, joints popping softly as he stretched, eyes drawn to the cub's subtle shift, its head lifting, ears perking toward the sounds of morning. The bond with Max had deepened in the dark hours, the dog grooming the cub's fur with gentle laps, eliciting faint rumbles of contentment that eased the last of the night's tension. Jack's revelation crystallized in that light. His son's accident hadn't just taken a life. It had stolen his capacity for hope, miles of highway numbing the pain until this scene revived it. The cub, abandoned and flawed, embodied the boy's unfiltered love for the broken, its white coat a symbol of purity, enduring neglect. He stepped closer, rough hand extending to scratch Max's ear, the dog's tail thumping in approval, the cub's blind form leaning into the shared warmth. The rising tension crested as Elena prepared for the transfer, the carrier's door yawning open like an uncertain portal. The cub's pulse quickened to 115 on the monitor, a spike of anxiety at the shift in air, its body tensing against Max. The dog whined low, refusing to yield space, her form blocking the handlers as instinct flared. Protect the vulnerable, hold the line. Elena paused, breath hitching, the moral suspense peaking, force the separation and risk collapse, or delay and defy the board. In that frozen moment, truths unveiled like dawn scattering mist. Elena confessed softly, voice barely above the hum. I lost my way once, choosing easy ends. Not this time. Tom nodded, his grip tightening on the thermos. She reminds me why we fight the fade. Sarah's tears fell. It's not just saving her, it's saving us. Jack murmured, for the kid I couldn't keep, this one's worth the road. They adapted, securing Max in the carrier beside the cub, the dog's presence a buffer through the jolting drive. Hours later, at the specialist center, surgery cleared the last fluid, the cub emerging bandaged but breathing free, blind eyes alert to new scents. Weeks blurred into months, the bond enduring, Max her guide, the humans her guardians. The cub grew, strong despite the sightless world, its white form a testament to misunderstood strength. In the epilogue of that winter, as spring thawed the hills, the cub, now a sleek adolescent, stepped into the release pen with Max at her side, the dog's form a shadow in the grass. Elena, Tom, Sarah, and Jack watched from the fence, hearts lighter, the town's judgments faded like old snow. Compassion had bloomed from fear, instinct bridging silences, redemption found in pause and breaths intertwined. The white tiger paused at the gate, head turning toward their voices, then bounded forward, Max trotting beside, into the horizon where pines met sky, a symbol of survival's quiet hope, cub and dog vanishing into the wild's embrace, proving kindness echoes beyond the cage. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching. The case of the blind white tiger cub was about to be put to sleep. But look what the dog did. See you in the next one.